Let's go ahead and kick things off. Welcome to the How I Automate My Work with AI webinar series. Super excited to be joined by Mallory from Tecovas today. Have a really awesome session lined up for you. And Mallory, thanks a ton for joining today.
Yeah, excited to be here.
Amazing. Just to run through a quick agenda to get us started, we'll kick off with some quick intros before I share just enough context on Parabola so you know exactly what Mallory is walking us through today. The first use case we're going to check out is Mallory's QBR reporting flow, and then we'll talk about their actualized shipment reporting flow as well. We'll try to save at least 5 to 10 minutes at the end for a little Q&A. And without further ado, my name is Adam Ricefield. I lead product marketing here at Parabola. And today I'm joined by Mallory Smith. Mallory will give you a chance to introduce yourself as well.
Hi, I'm Mallory. I work at Tecovas as a senior category manager for footwear. I've been there for about a year. And before that, I've been at places like American Eagle, Outdoor Voices, always in production and sourcing.
Amazing. Maybe you can share a little bit about what the day-to-day at Tecovas looks like when it comes to working with data, maybe before and since Parabola.
Yeah, definitely. So something that was very new to me coming into Tecovas is a lot of our shipments and actualized ex-factory dates are all managed outside the system, outside NetSuite, which is our system. So it is all manually updated each week in a shipping report. And we split out all of these POs. So we have hundreds of lines of data, thousands of lines of data that is all managed outside the system, which then puts a lot of work on the sourcing team to make sure all the other teams in our organization have the latest and greatest delivery information for all of our products.
Very cool. And when I was, chatting with friends about the webinar this week, when I mentioned Tecovas, everyone was like, "Oh my gosh, Tecovas, I know them." But for those maybe who are uninitiated, can you just share a little bit about what Tecovas does as a business?
Yeah, definitely. So Tecovas is a Western wear brand. We started mainly in boots. We are Texas-based, and we make cowboy boots and Western wear. We are about 10 years old.
Very cool. And last question before we get into it, about how big is your team and what kind of tech resources do you have available to it to Tecovas?
Yeah, we have about 6 people on the sourcing team. And from a tech resource, we have a lot of systems that we're implementing. So we use NetSuite. That's been implemented for a while. We are implementing a new PLM system this year. And then we're also implementing a new system called Anvil, which will help us push data into NetSuite so we can be more systematic.
Very cool. I appreciate it. Before we go ahead and actually dig into some of the flows that we're looking at today, just want to give everyone a little overview of Parabola in case this is your first time seeing the tool, and we'll keep this under 2 minutes here. So Parabola is an AI-enabled workflow builder that makes it easy to organize and structure the messy data running throughout your company, whether it comes from emails, PDFs, spreadsheets, siloed systems, you name it. So you can really automate the work that you always thought was going to be manual. And so just to show you kind of the fundamental building blocks of Parabola, right now we are in the canvas looking at a flow really comprised of 4 different steps here. The first of those are steps to pull in data from really any data source. In this example, pulling in data from an email, or we're pulling information off a PDF using AI and getting it into a nice structured table. And then we also can pull data from places like ShipHero, Shopify, databases, whatever systems are in your stack can probably connect to it in Parabola. From there, we have a whole bunch of different steps to transform your data. Think anything you'd otherwise do in a spreadsheet. So that could be steps to clean your data. Maybe we're combining it across sources based on SKU, and maybe we're using AI to explain exactly what we'd like to transform, and then using AI to generate custom code to actually transform our data for us. Third type of step are going to be steps to actually send data off and action on our data. That could be sending an email, creating a visualization, pushing data back to some place like Google Sheets or NetSuite. And then finally, we have cards as well, which are all of these pieces of documentation you see throughout the flow. So we really understand what's going on step by step. Now, if you were building one of these flows from scratch, you could use our AI-powered chat interface to just describe what you want to build. So in this example, I'm saying, help me build a packing list reconciliation. And then Parabola is automatically adding the right steps directly to the canvas and giving you an overview of exactly how to build that flow based on tons of example flows and best practices baked into the system. Now that we got all of that out of the way, Mallory, anything I missed that really stands out to you as when you think of Parabola, this is kind of like the key in your mind?
I say without knowing SQL and Python, Parabola allows me to do some like really fun, crazy stuff that I was never able to do before.
It's amazing. Well said. Amazing. All right. So jumping into our first use case here, we have QBR reporting. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what a QBR is, how you were doing it before Parabola, and what this process kind of looks like for you all.
Yeah, definitely. So QBR is our quarterly business review. And we are basically looking at how our vendors are performing at a monthly and at a quarterly basis, and then sharing that out internally with our internal Tecovas team and having QBR meetings with our vendors on how we can action improvements. And historically, we were pulling all this data manually. So as I kind of mentioned at the beginning of this call, we manage all of our split shipments outside the system. And we have a lot of split shipments. So we'll write a PO to a factory for about 40,000 units, and we will have 10 to 12 different styles on that PO. And they have a month-long ship window, and the vendor can ship anything on that PO throughout that ship window. And so we know when we write the PO that those POs will split into upwards of 10 different shipments. All of that is being manually tracked outside the system, and all of our styles have up to 30 SKUs. So you can imagine that our PO data is massive, and our POs have tons of lines. And then when you get to splitting that in a system, it becomes super manual and not really unmanageable. So
I can see the pain in your eyes.
yes. So we have a document that we call the shipping report, and that is where we track all of our split shipments. So historically, we would rebuild one of these reports every single week. And then for QBR, we would go back and actualize each month by manually copying and pasting data from the shipping report into our actualized shipments. So it created opportunity for mistakes, for us to misreport things, and it was super manual and super time consuming. So bring in Parabola. We pulled this data into a Google Doc, and now we're able to analyze all this data much quicker. Parabola does a lot of the calculations, a lot of analysis for us that allows us to, instead of building the data and truly like report out on the data and work with our vendors to have quicker actions for issues that we're seeing in the production cycle.
Very cool. And I'll flip over to that flow in just a second here. We're going to be using the word actualized a lot in this session. So Mallory, can you just provide a quick definition for us on that one?
Yeah. So like I said, the vendors are splitting those POs out and split shipping multiple times. So it is hard to know where everything is shipping and when it's shipping. So this is really allowing us to see like, this is actually what the vendor shipped, and this is what they told us that they were going to ship. So we can analyze how good their reporting is to us as well.
Totally. So in summary, you're purchasing a very large number of SKUs and units from different suppliers. When you have one of those large shipments, it might be spread across 10 different shipments to actually receive those goods. So your job is making sure you know exactly when you're getting all of those units across all those different shipments and tracking when they actually come in to ultimately hold your supplier network accountable.
Correct.
Amazing. Jumping over to our flow here. Here you can kind of see this end-to-end flow where we're starting by pulling in data. We have all of our transformations in the middle, and then we're actioning on data at the end. Mallory, maybe I can turn it over to you and just let you kind of walk us through what's happening in this workflow.
Yeah, definitely. So the first step, we are looking at our SKU level PO data that is shared in Google Drive. So this is all of our actual shipments from all across our categories. So apparel, accessories, and footwear. We are combining all the quarters together into one view. And then we're adding month and quarter columns. So we're doing a custom AI step to just look at these columns and add the month and the quarter that's associated with all of them. So we can look at the data both at a quarterly level and at a monthly level, so we can really pinpoint where we're seeing issues along the supply chain.
Very cool. And just to double click on that point for a second, I know previously you had a couple different steps here. Maybe you can talk about what we were doing here versus how this has kind of been simplified with the custom transform step.
Yeah, definitely. So I actually created this AI or this step before we had custom AI. So initially I used that if else column and basically set up, hey, if the source column says January, associate it with the month of January and so forth for every month. So a little bit more time consuming than the custom AI where you can just give it a prompt to look at all the months together.
Very cool. So once we've actually pulled in all of our data, we've combined it all, we've determined what's our month and our quarter that we've actually received the shipment, then kind of where do we go from there?
Yeah, so we're looking at a handful of things internally. So we want to understand what's the on-time delivery for each of our factories, and what are their lead times. So are they close to the goal lead times, or are they not? And our production lead time is truly, we're measuring it from when the PO was written to when it shipped the factory. So how many days are in between that, and how close to it is, how close is it to our goal?
Absolutely. And you're doing that through a little date comparison step here to figure out the number of days between those dates. Then we're doing some if else logic here where we're determining some goal lead times. How do you think about determining this value here?
Yeah, so we have new product, we call it MPD, and stands for new product development. And we give our factories 120 days to produce those. That is because they need to do a pilot run that takes an extra 30 days. And then everything that's carryover, they can produce in 90 days. So we have an indicator on all of our POs that indicates, is it a launch PO or is it a carryover PO? So I'm basically asking Parabola to look at that field and then assign a goal lead time.
Awesome. Once we assign that goal lead time, we're doing a couple other steps here to kind of format our data, and then we start joining it up with some NetSuite data. What are we pulling in this section of the flow?
Yeah, we're pulling in to understand if the style is an exotic style or not. That also indicates changes in the lead time. And we're also comparing it against the SKUs just to make sure all that SKU data is accurate.
Very cool. And then we come into this step where we're combining it. If you've worked in Excel world before, I'm sure you can empathize with the pain of a VLOOKUP here. Mallory in this example is just kind of like joining this all based on SKU. And then you want to kind of take us home from here?
Yeah. So then the final thing that I'm doing is looking at, so I'm adding in another step, which I could probably combine with custom AI now that I have if it's exotic or not. So I'm adding an exotic field to change anything that's carryover and exotic back to 120 days because we need 30 extra days for any of the exotic skins to get to our factories.
Very cool. And there's a good question here from Vince in the chat. Do you account for your days as business days or calendar days? How do you think about that difference?
We look at it solely on calendar days. And honestly, we've been going back and forth on if that's the correct way to look at the data, and if we should remove weekends going forward.
Totally. What's kind of driven that decision historically for you all?
It came up last QBR because we have most of our factories are located in Mexico. They close for about 2 weeks during the holiday season. And so we wanted to kind of take out the holiday timings. So we were figuring out better ways to calculate that to not include holidays and closures.
Very cool. As we kind of come down the flow, we determine our goal lead time. I thought this was a really cool custom transform step that you built here. Can you share a little bit about how you kind of built this step and maybe what it looked like before AI if you had built it out then?
Yeah, definitely. So I did not build it out pre-AI, but what we were doing historically in an Excel was just adding 14 days to a date and then doing if formula. Basically, what we want to look at is how, if a vendor is late on something, how late are they? Are they like a month late? Or are they within a 2-week window? Because that can really help us determine like how badly did we miss? And so I'm basically asking this custom AI, hey, the X factory date, if there's 2 extra weeks that the vendor had, could they have delivered this on time? And then I can look at what was the on-time delivery, just X factory to PO issue date. And then I can look at what was the on-time delivery if we added 2 weeks and the vendors had 2 more weeks. And that really helps us figure out how well we're doing.
Very cool. And I'm sure there are some people on the call today who joined wanting to learn, like, hey, how is Mallory actually using AI in her day-to-day? What can I steal from this session and actually start using immediately? Can you talk a little bit about how maybe people who are new to automation and AI can think about this custom transform step and how it might be able to help some of their data operations?
Yeah, I would say the majority of the time I'm looking at it from a date perspective. So it helps me like really standardize how I'm looking at dates. I always want to look at the month number and the month, which is kind of an annoying Excel formula if you know it. So it kind of helps me just easily look at dates and understand, yeah, how close we are to the dates that we're hitting. And like, that's the main way that I'm using that AI functionality.
Totally. This came up on yesterday's webinar as well. People aren't talking about using AI to normalize dates a whole lot on LinkedIn, and that's not what you're going to read in the articles, but it's a very practical use case here. And this step basically gives you the ability to just describe in plain language what you'd like to automate, and then it shows you what custom code is being applied to your data. So just a really easy way to do more advanced data transformation than maybe you're familiar with doing in Excel, and a really easy to write way here. Once we do all of that transformation, can you share a little bit about kind of how you use this data once it ultimately gets pushed to Google Sheets?
Yeah, so it gets pushed to Google Sheets, and then we have Google charts that are automatically updated that are really showing these metrics that we're looking at quarterly. So on-time delivery, the lead times or on-time delivery with the grace periods. And so this is pushing and updating all of those charts on a monthly basis. And then it also allows us to run another flow in Parabola called QBR data external, and I can push all this data to our factories, and then they get everything on a monthly basis, and they can really understand what they're doing, how they're doing each month. Historically, we were not able to run this monthly for them because it took too much effort, and so we could only give them this data on a quarterly basis. So it really allows us to just share this data much quicker.
That's awesome. And what does that faster feedback loop actually do for you, Tecovas, as a business?
Yeah, we can make better decisions on staging materials or look at truly like what is driving our on-time delivery, our late deliveries. For Q1, we noticed that most of our late deliveries were due to or were in new product. All of our carryover was delivering 95% or above, which is fantastic. So it allowed us to really drill down into our new product process. What are we not giving the vendors? Like, how are we not setting them up for success? So we can really focus in on that area that's not performing up to our goals.
Very cool. Before we jump out of this QBR flow, one last thing I want to show off here is when I was reviewing this flow before the session and trying to understand everything happening step by step, did ask Parabola's kind of AI chat here, like, hey, can you explain to me what's actually happening in the calculate production lead times and analyze supplier classes card? Like, how does this work? And what this is doing is actually analyzing all the steps and data in the flow, It gave us a little walkthrough of exactly what each one of those steps is doing with a full breakdown here. So just a really easy way for Mallory to take all the documentation that she's added to this flow and easily hand this off to teammates so everyone knows exactly what's going on step by step. Now that we've kind of ran through this flow, Mallory, before we shift gears, anything else that you'd add to this workflow before we cap it off?
Mm-mm.
Amazing. Cool. Well, moving on to our next use case here, let's talk about actualized shipment reporting. Can you just share a little bit about, I think you gave us the context of what is this, but maybe how did it work before Parabola as a quick refresher?
Yeah, definitely. So as a reminder, we split all of our POs. We manage it off a system. So this is allowing us to pull our data from SPS to see what actually shipped and then compare it against our receipts. And this runs basically hourly. So I can go into this chart and see where everything from our shipment and our receipt data is at any given time.
Awesome. And jumping over to that flow here, we have a couple of different data sources here. We're combining it all. Can you share a little bit about kind of how this flow works? And then we can double click on the pull from inbound email step here.
Yeah, definitely. So it is pulling receipt data out of NetSuite that's set up through email trigger. This was set up before the NetSuite custom AI, but it's basically taking receipt data from NetSuite, from a email that NetSuite sends me every time a new item receipt is created, and then that forwards to a Parabola table that then is combining it with historical receipt data.
Very cool. And can you share a little bit about, it's something that if you've been using Parabola for a while, it just feels like, oh, that's how Parabola works. But maybe an interesting one to double click on, actually using AI to extract information directly from this email. What's been your experience with pulling data from like email content, PDFs, messy Excel files in Parabola?
Yeah, definitely. This is actually the first flow that I've really set up to pull from an email. And I get these emails probably 50 a day. So it really allows me to synthesize this data quickly because it's just being forwarded to Parabola and then put in a chart. And so I can see all that data instead of going individually through emails or downloading a report from NetSuite of where we are with all of our receipts.
Absolutely. And so once we actually pull that data in, it looks like you're storing it in a database as well. What other data sets are we working with here?
Yeah, so the second one is just the receipts report that is coming from the same data that the email is. I just wanted to have all the historicals merged together so I could see a full view of everything that we've received in 2025.
Awesome. And then we have our data from SPS here.
Yeah, so our data from SPS is all what the factory is shipping each day. So this really allows me to actualize what they shipped for each PO and when they shipped it, which then feeds that QBR data. And so this is running every single day. It's pulling all the shipments from SPS for us to analyze.
Very cool. And then, one of the challenges when we're working with data in spreadsheets is we're not talking about, 7 to 20 to 30 rows of data here. You're working with 40,000 rows of data in one data set. In another data set, we're start working with 80,000 rows of data. If you told an operator, hey, mash all this data together in Excel, you can already imagine like the spinning wheel of death happening. So how do we kind of like combine all this data from here and work through the rest of the flow?
Yeah. So I'm combining all of it together. I'm having the receipt data match up to the SPS data. So I want to see like what receipt data is compared, is matched back to the ASN data. And this will allow me to look at, hey, what the vendor said that they shipped in SPS, is that actually what we received? And did they tell me that they shipped when they were actually going to ship? So those are the two big data points that I can see very easily from this flow.
Very cool. Once we combine all of that data, then we get back into some formatting here. You do things like format dates. Want to take it from here and kind of round out the flow?
Yeah, definitely. So I format the dates. I just like dates to be in a very specific format. When I'm looking at data, I hate the year being first. So very easy to change all of those columns. There's 4 or 5 date columns, I think, are actually I'm just changing 2, but makes it much easier for my brain to work. And then I'm just editing some of the columns that aren't necessary. There's a lot of data from SPS that I don't really care about, bill of landing and things like that. Just so removing that so I can see it cleanly what I want. And then I'm adding dates for the receipt month and for the ship date. So I'm asking it to add a month for when something shipped and when something was receipted, so I can look at what we're actualizing from a receipt month to month and what we're shipping month to month.
Very cool. And then we get into, I've seen supplier class in a couple different places across your flows. How does adding that kind of help with the data set that you're creating here? Because I know Tecovas has a ton of different suppliers.
Yeah, definitely. So we really manage, we structure our team to manage 3 different categories. That's how our business is set up. So we have the footwear category, which is the majority of our business. And then we have apparel and accessories that make up a smaller part, but we all have a category manager for each department. So I'm adding these supplier classes. So the other category managers can come into this data and look at very easily filter to their category and look at their data.
So it's not just about, you're managing footwear, not just about having visibility into footwear, but how do we also help all the other supplier class managers understand open shipments for their teams as well?
Yeah, exactly.
Very cool. And one question that we just had in the chat, are all products turnkey from Ali?
Um, yeah, I think
And
so. I think it's like pretty easy to pick up. Like there is a little bit of a learning curve when you first join Parabola, but I think everything, especially with the custom AI field, will really help you figure out what transforms to use for all the data.
Totally. And what's been, when I hear the word turnkey, a lot of times I think like, oh, off the shelf, I just use this template and then Parabola automatically works and it knows my data schema. The reality that we see every day is that every operational process is unique. It has its own edge cases and nuances. So what's been your experience kind of like customizing these flows to your specific SOPs?
Yeah, I think that has been really easy, especially as custom AI has come out. Sometimes if I've felt stuck in the past, I just write what I want to do in the custom AI. I might have to tweak it a little bit, but I've found it very user friendly to kind of get the results that I want.
Very cool. And so once we assign our supplier classes, just to round out this flow, we look at transit and check-in time, counting the number of days between those. We do a little formatting. And then how does your team actually use this ultimate Google Sheet you're creating?
Yeah, so this actually gets turned into the QBR data from the first flow. So without this, we would be manually pulling that data together for the QBR, which is amazing. And it also, the compare dates allows us to look at our transit dates. We put generic transit dates in to a lot of our TNAs at the beginning of the season. And this can allow us to really look at what the rolling 30, 60, 90-day average from each category or from each COO.
Very cool. And we had one question here about how NetSuite integration works. I know you mentioned in this one, you set this up a while ago. We do have that NetSuite step. Can you share a little bit just about kind of, if you were to explain to a colleague, like how does Parabola integrate with NetSuite? How does that typically work for you?
Yeah, so we have a ton of custom fields within NetSuite, which makes the pull from NetSuite a little bit more difficult for, I think, a novice user. How we've set up most of our NetSuite pulls right now are the API NetSuite pull. And we have 3 or 4 main reports that we're using. So we have an item report that's built out, we have a PO report, and we're working on a receipts report that then goes into a Parabola flow. that then anyone can use in our that has Parabola. So that's how we've kind of gotten around some of the custom fields that we have that just puts out all that data into JSON. And then we have these 3 reports that every person in our organization is pulling data from that then makes everything the same source, which is great.
Yep, I totally hear you there. And just to highlight really quickly, this question, how does NetSuite data integrate? That's the kind of question that you can drop directly into the chat in Parabola. And then Parabola is going to kind of search our documentation, best practices, look into how we use different steps, and then provide you with an overview of exactly how Parabola integrates data in NetSuite, giving you a bunch of those different options that Mallory just hit on there. So good question there, and good transition into last part of this session, which is going to be a Q&A. And so feel free to drop questions into the chat here. Mallory, the first one for you. How many org members get access to Parabola at Tecovas? Can you share and work on flows at the same time? I wish. I'll let you take that one.
I would say that I think we're probably up to like 15 or 20 users. It started out with just sourcing, so just like 5 or 6 people. And then as we started doing cool things within Parabola and being able to provide data faster to our cross-functional partners, our planning team, our planning team, our finance team are in there now, and our wholesale team. So it's growing and expanding, which is really great.
That's awesome. Very cool. As we wait for a couple more questions to come in here, I'll ask you one. If you were to talk to someone who was new to just automation and AI in general, based on your experience building flows, I'm curious what advice you'd give them for really finding success.
Like, just play around with it. I think there's sometimes a fear of going into Parabola and like knowing what to do. So yeah, I just like to play around with the prompts within AI, and you kind of refine it and figure out what you need to ask it go forward. But just a curiosity, I would say.
Totally. Easiest way to get going is just to start putting stuff on the canvas. I'm with you.
Yeah.
Last question I'll ask you, and then we'll see if there are any more from the audience here. We've talked about QBR reporting. We've talked about actualized shipment reporting. Can you just share a little bit else about kind of like where you found success automating different processes across Tecovas supply chain?
Yeah, definitely. We have flows built out for apparel, footwear, that whenever we download or whenever we write new POs, it gets sent to Parabola through NetSuite. And then that sends all the latest, greatest PO information to a Google Doc that's shared with all of our factories. So they're getting like, instead of just getting the PDFs through SPS, they're also getting that data for them to download and look at the same time. So that's like allowed us to share information with our factories much quicker. We do that, and we do a consumption report through there that kind of allows us to tell our tanneries and our suppliers what they should be expecting for the next month of POs, which is just streamline that like beginning PO process.
Totally. And I think a theme across some of the answers you've shared, like, yes, it's about getting your team data faster, but also about giving other internal stakeholders data faster, factories and suppliers data faster. So really cool have you kind of sped up that whole feedback loop. And then maybe last question, two-parter here from Vince. You have a magic wand. What's the thing that you want to build next in Parabola, and what feature do you most wish the Parabola team would build next for you?
I'm honestly really happy with the custom AI. I think that's been a life changer. Like, that's been a game changer. And it's really helped me build Parabola flows to the next level and much quicker. I would say historically I might have to put like 3 or 4 steps into a flow to get the same results as the custom AI. So that's been, I think it makes it easier to start Parabola and makes it easier to just transform the data quicker.
100%. Love to hear it. Our engineering team will appreciate that one.
Yeah.
Well, Mallory, this has been amazing. Really appreciate it. And just to give everyone a little overview of what's to come this week, yesterday we had an amazing session with Vince from Vacation Inc., where we covered his OTIF flow and ship to deliver flow. Those were some really impressive visualizations and cool flows. That's up on our YouTube page. And if you register for the event, should have a link to watch the recording. Tomorrow we'll be joined by Chris from Brone before Sam from Janie and Jack on Thursday, and they'll be rounding out the week with end of month financial reporting from with Crystal from Tushy. So a packed week ahead. But Mallory, this session was awesome, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, everyone. See you tomorrow.